Welcome, friend. Before we begin, make yourself comfortable. Dim the lights, settle into bed or your favorite chair, maybe switch on a fan for that soothing background hum. This story is meant to drift with you, slow and steady, like a candle burning down in a quiet Tudor hall. As always, you're invited to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this style of calm history. And do leave a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? We love knowing who's sharing these evenings with us. I'll close your eyes if you'd like. You find yourself in Tudor England, a place of velvet gowns, dangerous whispers, and the slow toll of church bells. Tonight, you're stepping into the world of Anne Boleyn. The queen so magnetic, so divisive that her rise and fall reshaped an entire kingdom. The first sound that reaches you is not an alarm clock, not the faint vibration of a phone on the nightstand, but the toll of church bells drifting through the mist. They echo slowly, solemnly, across fields wet with dew, over the smoke that curls from cottage chimneys and into your chamber. This is the rhythm of Tudor mornings, not digital, not precise, but heavy and steady, as if the whole countryside wakes together, whether it wants to or not. You pull yourself up from a bed that is both soft and scratchy at once. The mattress is stuffed with feathers, yet the linens are rougher than you're used to, woven thick and uneven. The covers smell faintly of smoke and lavender, herbs tucked in to chase away moths and perhaps, optimistically, fleas. Congratulations, your bed now comes with free livestock. You shiver slightly, the shutters do not quite meet, and a thin ribbon of cold air slides in. The walls are thick stone, but they seem to invite the breeze rather than resist it. Servants are already moving below stairs. You hear them boots on flagstones, the clatter of pots, the faint hiss of kindling catching in the kitchen hearth. Somewhere a dog barks, bored and hopeful in equal measure. You know it is early, because the world still feels blue-gray, and the fire in your own chamber has burned low, leaving only the smell of yesterday's smoke. In this world, you live not by the hour, but by the sun. The concept of 7 o'clock sharp is foreign. Instead, there's dawn, there's midday, and there's when the candle burns out. Your day begins when the light allows it to. For now, the faintest blush of pink is tugging at the horizon, promising that the city or the village, depending on where you find yourself, will soon stir fully to life. You wash your face in a basin of cold water. It's cold enough to sting, cold enough to make you suddenly wide awake, whether you wanted to be or not. Soap is a rare luxury. You make do with the brisk scrubbing of a cloth. Your clothes are waiting for you, layers upon layers, even for a morning indoors. Linen chemise, wool stockings, heavy gown. If you are lucky, it all smells faintly of dried herbs, though more often it smells faintly of, well, people. Laundry is not a daily event in Tudor England, unless you count brushing crumbs off your sleeves. Breakfast is not grand. Do not expect eggs Benedict or even a steaming bowl of porridge served on demand. Instead, you are handed a hunk of bread, yesterday's loaf softened by dipping it in ale. Yes, ale for breakfast it is safer than water, though weaker than what you might drink at supper. The taste is sour, yeasty, and surprisingly comforting, especially when paired with cheese or a dab of butter, if the household is prosperous. If you are of higher rank, perhaps you are offered a slice of cold meat, but mostly, breakfast is fuel, not fanfare. Outside, the streets are waking. Carts rattle over cobbles, leaving trails of hay and manure. Children dash through the lanes, wooden shoes clacking as they run errands, too small for servants and too important to ignore. Women step out to draw water, their buckets banging against the well's stone rim. Men already shoulder tools or lead animals through the fog. The air smells of damp earth, dung, smoke, and something frying in a pan. It is not glamorous, but it is alive. The great houses stir differently. If you're imagining endless banquets, know that those belong to feast days. On ordinary mornings, nobles also rub their eyes and grumble about drafts. Their chambers may be larger, hung with tapestries to soften the chill, but they are not immune to the cold that seeps through stone walls. Servants arrive with ewers of water, fresh rushes for the floor, and clothing laid out with precision. Breakfast here is richer meat pies, roasted fowl, cups of spiced wine, but even so, the business of the day looms. Everywhere, there is a sense of order sliding into place. Bells mark the time again. summoning some to prayers, others to workshops, and still others to council chambers where the affairs of England will be debated. It feels both routine and weighty, as though the entire kingdom is perpetually balancing on the edge of change. And of course, it is, because in this era, change often begins not with the people in the fields or the kitchens, but with the glittering figures in royal halls. Anne Boleyn was born into this world of bells, bread, and brisk mornings. Her first cries would have mingled with the same smells and sounds: the wood smoke, the church bells, the dogs barking for scraps. She was no peasant child, scrambling barefoot through mud, but she was also not born into untouchable majesty. Hers was a family, rising, reaching, polishing itself for the stage of court. It is here, in this ordinary rhythm of Tudor mornings, that her extraordinary path begins. From the sound of bells to the creak of chamber doors, from the damp chill to the smell of roasted meat in noble kitchens, this is the backdrop of an childhood. Already, she is learning the skills expected of a well-bred girl: how to bow just low enough, how to embroider with neat stitches, how to play the lute without grimacing at the squeaky strings. The Boleyns were not nobility carved in marble, but a family on the make-wealthy merchant's blood polished into gentry sheen. In other words, a childhood of grooming not for innocence, but for usefulness. The castle smelled of beeswax polish and roasted meat when the household gathered for meals. You can imagine Anne at the table, seated lower than her older siblings, but still absorbing everything the way her father smoothed over conversations with tact. She gathers herbs not just to perfume linen, but to mix into remedies: ginger for an unsettled stomach, sage for sore throats. Knowledge of herbs was part of daily life, a practical science taught alongside prayers. The rhythm of her childhood was this blend of the practical and the polished, mucking through gardens one moment, reciting polite conversation the next. The wooden ship pitches against the waves and the air smells of salt and tar, mingled with the sour temps of too many passengers packed too close together. You hold the railing and squint toward the French coast, wondering how a teenage girl from Kent must have felt making this same voyage. Nervous, perhaps, but also alight with possibility. France was the great stage of elegance in Europe, and Anne Boleyn was about to step into its wings. When you arrive, the change is immediate. England had its charmapple orchards, smoky hearths, and damp rushes, but France is brighter, sharper, louder. The streets of the French court buzz with life, hawkers calling out in quick syllables, musicians plucking lutes with elaborate flourishes, women sweeping past in gowns that look like moving paintings. Fabrics are richer, dyed in colors so bold they seem almost implausible. Gold thread glitters at the edges, pearls catch the light. If Hever Castle was respectable comfort, this is spectacle. Anne first entered service in the household of Margaret of Austria and later Queen Claude of France. You can picture her, young and eager, navigating a world that demanded polish in every glance and gesture. These were not places for timid girls. Court life was a theater of manners, where one's survival depended on timing a smile, holding back a retort, bowing neither too low nor too shallow. Anne absorbed it all. She listened to French spoken with the rapid ease of native tongues, and slowly the words stuck, turning her accent lilting and her manner cosmopolitan. Here, she encountered Renaissance culture firsthand, poets declaiming verses as if their lives depended on them. Painters experimenting with perspective, scholars debating theology over goblets of spiced wine. The air itself seemed charged with ideas. Anne was not just learning how to curtsy, she was learning how to think in the quick, layered way of courtiers. She saw how wit could be sharper than steel, how women, even within constraints, could maneuver with elegance and power. The French court smelled of beeswax, musk, and rosewater, scents carefully chosen to mask the less poetic realities of hygiene. Meals were spectacles, 2 platters of roasted meats dressed with herbs, sauces bright with imported citrus. You sit at the edge of a banquet hall and watch Anne, young but composed, take it all in. She studies which jokes earn a laugh, which glances are ignored. How a single raised eyebrow can silence a conversation. These are lessons more valuable than embroidery, though she kept her needlework sharp as well. In the Queen's household, she learned devotion and discipline. Queen Claude was pious, reserved, her court less raucous than others, but still steeped in refinement. Anne would have risen early, helped in the Queen's chambers, and spent her hours among the other ladies, singing, dancing, reading aloud. It was a training ground, and she excelled. By the time she returned to England, she could play the lute gracefully, dance with the controlled abandon of the French style, and converse in a language that made her seem worldly and rare. But it wasn't just skills she brought back. It was confidence. Imagine being a girl from the Kent countryside, suddenly standing in a hall where dukes and duchesses hung on every word of Erasmus and Rabelais. You would return home changed, sharper, aware that your world was much bigger than the damp fields and quiet chapels you once knew. Anne did just that. Her French education gave her poise that made her stand out when she re-entered the more provincial English court. It is easy now to think of it only in terms of the scandal and downfall to come. But here in France, she was simply blossoming. The music, the poetry, the fashion, the politics, they wove themselves into her character, making her magnetic in ways that even Henry VIII, in all his bluster, could not resist. The road back to England feels different now. The sky is the same familiar gray, the hedgerows thick with damp leaves, the smoke of cottages clinging to the air. And yet you carry France within youth, the cadence of its songs, the cut of its gowns, the quick-fire wit of its conversations. To step once more onto English soil is not to return unchanged. It is to bring something foreign into a world that still fancies itself grand, though you know it looks a little provincial after Parisian splendor. When Anne Boleyn arrived at the English court, she was not merely another young lady in waiting. She was an import, curiosity. Imagine the hush that fell when she entered a chamber. Her French fashions a little slimmer, her sleeves a little longer, her headdress tilted in that unmistakable continental way. It was not just what she wore, but how she wore it. the easy grace of someone who had learned in rooms where even the queen's sigh had meaning. The Tudor court was lively, yes, but in a different key. Less gilded elegance, more oak beams and roaring hearths. You can almost smell it, the mingling of roast meat, ale, damp wool, and the faint iron temps of rushes freshly scattered on the floor. Courtiers played their games of favor with the same seriousness as those in France, but the humor was broader, the manners earthier. England might not glitter, but it had its own rough charm. You walk into the great hall with her and feel the eyes on your back. Men glance over their cups of wine, women whisper behind feathered fans. Who is this young woman who laughs a little differently, whose words roll out with a French twist, whose gown is cut just a touch sharper? She is not yet infamous, not yet the center of scandal, but already she is noticed. Being noticed is half the battle. In service to Queen Catherine of Aragon, Anne found her place. Catherine was dignified, steady, and pious, more Spanish reserve than French sparkle. But even in that sober household, Anne stood out. She was quick with a lute, graceful in dance, lively in conversation. Imagine her seated at embroidery, head bent over the fine stitches, while men in the hall whispered about the clever French-trained girl who played her part too well to be ordinary. The English court was a stage, and she knew how to act. She flirted without overstepping, teased without offending, charmed without surrendering too much. She had seen how women in France walked the tightrope between admiration and danger, and she learned to balance on it herself. You might compare it to juggling knives while smiling drop one, and you bleed, but keep them spinning, and the crowd never looks away. Life at court was loud and restless. Pages clattered down corridors, minstrels struck up lively tunes, nobles argued over politics or hunts. Yet in the midst of all that noise, Anne cultivated something quieter: presence. When she entered a room, she didn't need to shout or demand attention. She simply stood where the light could catch the pearl at her throat, smiled as if she knew more than she was saying, and let curiosity do the work. And curiosity did its work well. It wasn't long before her name began to circle in conversation. Who is this girl? How did she learn to move like that? Speak like that? Look like that? England had plenty of pretty faces, but not many that combined beauty with a foreign edge and quick wit. The French had given her more than polish, they had given her mystery. Still, Anne's early days at court were not yet scandalous. She was, for the moment, simply another lady serving her queen. Walking the long corridors lined with tapestries, kneeling at chapel, playing her part in masques and dances. But seeds were already being planted. Seeds of intrigue, of ambition, of fascination. Once seeds are planted in the fertile ground of the Tudor court, they rarely grow into ordinary flowers.
The Tudor court is restless tonight. Torches flicker against the high stone walls, casting long shadows across banners that hang heavy with the Tudor rose. Minstrels strum, dancers laugh, the air thick with the smell of spiced wine and roasting meat. Yet the most powerful man in the hall is not looking at the feast before him, nor the game of cards at his elbow, nor even his dignified queen seated at the dais. His gaze is elsewhere, sliding across the room, lingering too long on one young woman. And once Henry VIII fixes his eyes on something, or someone, they rarely shift without consequence. Imagine the weight of that stare. The king was not subtle. He was larger than life, broad-shouldered, red-bearded, his presence impossible to ignore. When his interest turned, it was like the sun emerging from cloud, sudden, blinding, and inescapable. For Anne Boleyn, still newly polished from her French education, it must have felt both dangerous and thrilling. She was not the first to catch his attention, nor would she be the last, but Henry's gaze had a way of rewriting lives. Catherine of Aragon, dignified and devout, had long borne the burden of being wife to a wandering eye. Henry was not cruel in his infidelity, at least not yet, but careless. He treated mistresses as passing diversions, tokens of his own virility. The court knew it, whispered about it, watched as ladies rose and fell in the king's favour like leaves tossed on the wind. Now, with Anne in the hall, whispers began again. Not loud, not yet, but present. The thing was, Anne was different. She didn't bend under his attention. She didn't blush and falter or rush to please. She smiled, yes, but carefully. She teased, but only in half measures. If Henry reached for admiration, she gave him wit. If he offered flattery, she returned irony. This was not a game he was used to losing, and that only deepened his fascination. You can picture it. The king, accustomed to being the sun around which others orbited, suddenly circling someone else's gravity. The court itself became the stage for their early dance. A glance across a mask, a word exchanged during a hunt, a compliment half disguised in poetry. Anne, with her French-trained ease, knew the value of delay. She was not a prize to be seized quickly. She was the falcon, wings spread, making the king work for every approach. Imagine his frustration, and then his delight. Henry VIII did not fall in love quietly. He thundered into it. Around them, courtiers watched with sharp eyes. To gain the king's affection was to rise, but to rise too far was perilous. Still, there were perks, gifts, attention, power borrowed by association. You can almost hear the gossip, carried in hushed voices along the gallery. He favors her. Did you see the way she turned away? Mark my words, this will end in ruin. The Tudor court thrived on such whispers, as nourishing as bread and wine. Catherine, meanwhile, sat beneath her crown with practiced composure. She had weathered storms before. Yet one can imagine the sting, the quiet humiliation of knowing your husband. His eyes roamed freely while your own body, worn by miscarriages and grief, bore the weight of his disappointment. The hall was full, but in such moments, Catherine must have felt profoundly alone. For Anne, though, the king's wandering eye was both opportunity and danger. To yield too soon was to be cast aside, like others before her. To resist too long was to risk angering him. The balance was delicate, a rope stretched taut above the jaws of court politics. Every smile mattered, every refusal mattered more, and each time Henry returned, more insistent, the rope trembled. You sense that this is no longer idle flirtation. The king's eye has wandered before, yes, but this time it lingers. This time, it sharpens into hunger, into obsession, into something that will grow far larger than either of them can yet imagine. The torches burn lower, the music softens, and in the dim light of the Tudor court, a dangerous fascination is kindling.
The first letter comes quietly, folded into itself, sealed with the weighty red wax of a king's signet. When you imagine opening it, you don't see neat type or smooth printing. You see ink that blots slightly on parchment the loops of Henry, his hand sprawling with the confidence of someone who has never once doubted his authority. His words are passionate, yes, but also impatient in the way of a man unused to waiting for anything. He asks for affection, for acknowledgement, for something more than coy glances across the room. And Anne, holding that letter, knows she has the upper hand precisely because she will not give him what he wants. Not yet. You can almost hear the scratching of quills echoing in chambers late at night. Anne replies with precision, with elegance, but never surrender. She thanks him, perhaps, for his affection, but draws a careful line. It is the kind of response that says, "I know your worth, but I know mine too." Every refusal is not really a refusal at all. It's an invitation to continue. And Henry, instead of being discouraged, grows more fervent. Imagine the most powerful man in England, reduced to a lovesick correspondent, sending letter after letter like an eager court poet. The irony alone is delicious. The letters themselves are treasures of courtly love, relics of a medieval tradition dressed in Renaissance ink. Henry writes of pain in her absence, of longing, of sleepless nights. He compares Anne to virtues, to jewels, to the sun. But beneath the flowery language beats something raw, desire and obsession. You get the sense he is not just writing to Anne, he is writing to convince himself that he can still command her as he commands armies. And then there is Anne's part of the dance. Her replies, measured, delayed, clever. Sometimes she ignores a letter for days, letting the king stew. Sometimes she responds promptly, but with guarded words, a compliment offset by restraint. It is the art of withholding. Imagine waiting by the hearth, knowing a messenger will arrive, pretending not to care when he does, and then spending long, deliberate minutes before breaking the seal. Timing is everything. Each pause, each silence, draws him tighter into the snare. All the while, the court watches. Servants carry these letters. Chamberlains pass them along. Nothing at court is ever entirely secret. Rumors seep into the air like smoke from a smoldering log. Those who dislike Anne call her ambitious, manipulative, dangerous. Those who admire her call her brilliant, bold, a woman unlike the rest. The truth probably lies somewhere between the ink strokes. What matters is that the letters keep flowing, a current pulling both Anne and Henry further from the shore of ordinary courtly dalliance. Think about the intimacy of such letters in an age without instant messages. Every word takes time, time to write, time to deliver, time to wait for reply. That slowness gives weight to every phrase. Henry's words are not dashed off in distraction. They're carved into parchment, handed to a trusted courier, carried through chambers and corridors. Each one is a risk. What if it fell into the wrong hands? What if Catherine saw? What if rivals turned it into proof of scandal? And yet Henry persists, letter after letter, as though addicted to the very danger of it. There's a strange tenderness in imagining these exchanges, mid the pomp of kingship and the heavy machinery of dynastic politics. Here is Henry, vulnerable, confessing like any love-struck man might. And here is Anne, sharp enough to know that in holding back, she holds power. The letters become not just notes of affection, but weapons in a courtly chess game, each one moving pieces toward a checkmate that neither side can yet fully see. Eventually, the rhythm of writing and waiting begins to reshape the court itself. The Queen notices, the nobles notice. England itself will soon notice. 4 letters are never just private words. They are seeds of change. And these seeds are about to grow into something vast and unruly, because once ink is spilled, it has a way of seeping outward, into lives, into politics, into history itself. And the next letter may carry more than desire. It may carry the promise of an entirely new order. The Queen's presence is like a steady candle in a drafty hall, unwavering. Dignified but flickering under pressure she refuses to show. Catherine of Aragon has been here a long time, longer than Anne has been alive. In fact, married to Henry for decades. The Spanish princess who once represented an unshakable alliance between England and Spain. She is pious, learned, gracious, and beloved by the people. You can almost picture her, dark-haired rosary beads slipping through her fingers. Her voice calm, even as the walls of her marriage begin to creak. Yet her shadow hangs over every whispered exchange between Anne and Henry. When you imagine the court, you see Catherine seated firmly on the throne beside her husband, a crown balanced on her head not just as jewelry, but as identity. For all of Henry's wandering affections, Catherine remains the lawful queen, and in a world where marriage is a sacred, indissoluble vow that means everything. Divorce is not an option. Annulments are rare and tangled with canon law. To push Catherine aside is not like canceling a day. Tit is to tug at the very fabric of Christendom. Knows this. Everyone at court knows this. You, standing among the courtiers in your heavy velvet, can almost feel the tension. Every glance Henry casts toward. Anne is measured against the shadow of Catherine's unshakable presence. If Anne is sunlight, bright and playful, Catherine is the solid oak tree-rooted, immovable, a living reminder of duty and tradition. The Queen's greatest strength and her greatest wound is her role as mother. She has given Henry one surviving child, a daughter, Mary, but sons, those elusive, fragile hopes for a dynasty, have not come. Each miscarriage, each stillbirth, widened the crack between them. And while Catherine bore her grief in silence, Henry brooded. To him, Catherine's inability to produce a living son was not tragedy alone, it was divine punishment. A sign, he began to convince himself, that their marriage was cursed from the start. Still, Catherine did not waver. She stood her ground with a quiet, almost stubborn grace. She was no meek consort waiting to be discarded. She wrote to Rome. She appealed to her nephew the emperor. She reminded Henry and everyone else that she was queen by law and sacrament. You sense her dignity filling the room, an invisible presence even when she's not there, like the cool stillness of a cathedral nave. And for Anne, this was both obstacle and weapon. Catherine's shadow made the game more dangerous. If Henry wanted her, he could not simply take her as he had others. To elevate Anne, he would have to strike at the very core of his marriage. That danger gave Anne leverage. She could resist longer, demand more. She could position herself not as another mistress, but as something greater, a woman who might replace the queen herself. It is worth pausing to consider the weight of that shadow. Catherine was not unloved. The English people admired her devotion, her generosity, her endurance. To displace her would mean not just angering Rome, but offending the hearts of Henry's own subjects. Even the courtiers who gossiped behind fans and sleeves knew that this was not a simple flirtation anymore. The Queen's presence loomed over every letter, every glance, every whispered promise. Imagine the contrast. Catherine in her chapel candles glowing against carved stone, praying in Latin for strength and for her husband's fidelity, and in a gilded chamber. Pen in hand, considering exactly how much affection to show and how much to withhold. Between them stood Henry, restless, dissatisfied, convinced by desire that his marriage was a mistake heaven itself wanted him to undo. Catherine's shadow darkened more than Anne's path, it darkened the whole of England. For as long as Catherine sat on the throne, the crown itself was steady. To remove her would mean shaking the kingdom to its roots. And yet, as Henry's passion grew, as Anne's refusal sharpened, that shadow would no longer seem insurmountable. It would become the very thing Henry swore to banish.
It begins innocently enough, or at least that is how Henry frames it. A theological puzzle, a knot of conscience. You can almost hear the sighs echoing off the vaulted ceilings of his chapel as he kneels in restless prayer, convincing himself that God is displeased with his marriage. After all, Catherine was once married to his brother Arthur. The book of Leviticus warns against such unions, declaring them cursed. And Henry, never one to miss a convenient scripture, takes this as a sign. Perhaps, he reasons, the lack of a surviving son is not Catherine's fault at all. Perhaps it is divine punishment for a marriage that never should have been. But beneath the scripture and the solemn talk of sin, you sense the real pulse of the matter. Anne. The letters, the glances, the refusals, all of them lead here. If Catherine had given him sons, perhaps Henry would have remained restless but resigned. Yet now, his hunger for Anne blends seamlessly with his hunger for a male heir. The two desires twist together until they are indistinguishable. To have one, he convinces himself, he must have the other. And so begins what the court will soon call the king's great matter. It is less romantic than it sounds. The matter is essentially this. Henry wants an annulment from Catherine, permission from Rome to declare their marriage invalid. He argues not from cruelty, but from piety, or at least that is his public claim. He presents himself as a husband racked with guilt, desperate to set his soul in order. And yet, in the same breath, he is quietly promising Anne that she will be queen. Imagine the irony. A theological crisis fueled by something as simple and human as infatuation. The problem is that Catherine is no passive figure. She refuses to vanish quietly, refuses even to admit that their marriage is flawed. She insists it was pure, lawful, and sanctified. She swears she was a virgin when she wed Henry, making their union entirely valid. And she has allies, powerful ones. Her nephew is Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, one of the most powerful rulers in Europe. To annul Catherine is to insult him, and by extension, much of continental Christendom. The papacy, meanwhile, is caught in a bind. The Pope, Clement VII, might have entertained Henry's petition in another moment, but Charles V has just sacked Rome and essentially holds the Pope under his thumb. Granting Henry's wish would mean angering the emperor, who could, quite literally, imprison him again. So, Clement delays. He stalls, he sends envoys, commissions inquiries, arranges debates. And as months stretch into years, Henry grows more desperate. Picture the English court during this time. Every meal, every mask, every hunt is tinged with tension. Will the king put Catherine aside? Will Anne rise? Servants whisper as they carry platters of roasted venison. Nobles hedge their bets, some flattering Catherine's endurance, others quietly aligning with Anne's rising star. The entire kingdom feels suspended in a sort of collective breath-holding, waiting to see which woman will prevail. For Henry, the matter becomes more than personal. It transforms into a question of sovereignty. Why should the fate of England's crown depend on the whims of an Italian pope, who himself is bound to the will of a foreign emperor? Why should his conscience be shackled by distant politics when he is God's anointed king? The more Clement refuses, the more Henry convinces himself that this is not simply about marriage. It is about England's independence, about divine right, about kingship itself. And so, a marital problem grows into a national crisis. What began as the king's private heartache becomes a question of loyalty, faith, and identity. If you stand in the echoing halls of Westminster, you can almost feel the kingdom creaking under the strain. The great matter is not just Catherine's fate, nor Anne's ambition, but the fate of the entire English church.
You can almost hear the creak of wood and the shuffle of parchment in Parliament chambers as the tide begins to turn. What started as Henry's private anguish over a marriage has swollen into something far larger. Something no king before him dared. A direct challenge to the Pope himself. The great matter has become unbearable in its waiting. Rome delays, Catherine refuses and insists, and Henry grows tired of being told no. If the Pope will not grant him freedom, then Henry will simply take it. Imagine the boldness of that thought. For centuries, the Pope has been the final authority over kings, the shepherd of Christendom. Monarchs quarreled, yes, but in the end they bent the knee to Rome. Henry VIII, with his fiery temper and restless ambition, decides he will do the opposite. Why should a pope in Italy, tangled in foreign politics, dictate the fate of England's crown and heirs? Why should the King of England kneel when he himself is anointed by God? The more you roll this question around in your mind, the more radical it sounds. And yet in Henry's mind, it begins to feel inevitable. So Parliament is summoned, clerics are pressed, and a slow but steady process begins. The Act in Restraint of Appeals, passed in 1533, declares that England is no longer subject to the Pope in matters of marriage. Appeals to Rome are forbidden. Instead, the king himself will be the final judge. The words seem dry on parchment, but in truth, they are thunderclaps. It is as though Henry has reached out, snapped a chain, and let it clatter to the floor. For Anne, this is no idle reform. This is her doorway to the throne. Every act passed, every oath sworn, draws her closer to becoming queen. You can picture her watching the proceedings with composed serenity, her mind calculating each step. Catherine's shadow still lingers. But now it is being pushed back, not by secret letters or furtive glances, but by the weight of law itself. Of course, this break is not neat. It is messy, dangerous, and divisive. Some clergy resist, clinging to Rome. Others bend to the king's will, whether from conviction or survival instinct. Ordinary people are bewildered one day. The Pope is head of the church. The next day the king is. Change filters slowly through sermons, proclamations, and whispers in village taverns. You can almost taste the confusion in the air, like bitter ale left too long in the cask. Henry, however, is resolute. In 1534, the Act of Supremacy makes it official. He is not only King of England, but also supreme head of the Church of England. With a stroke of the quill, the Pope is dethroned in England, and Henry stands taller than ever before. It is an audacious gamble, severing ties with centuries of tradition, but Henry frames it as nothing less than divine will. To resist him now is to resist God's chosen ruler. The consequences ripple outward. Clergy who refuse the oath of supremacy are imprisoned, some executed. Friends of Catherine, loyal to Rome, find themselves caught between conscience and survival. And Catherine herself, stripped of her title, becomes the Dowager Princess of Wales, a polite demotion that is, in fact, a crushing blow. Yet still she refuses to yield, her dignity unbroken even as her crown is taken. Anne, meanwhile, steps into the light. No longer merely the woman Henry loves, she is poised to be queen. The break with Rome has paved her path, though the ground beneath is still perilous. Every smile she offers at court is shadowed by the knowledge that this victory has come at immense cost, not just to Catherine, but to the unity of an entire realm. Stand in Westminster Hall and you can feel it. The kingdom has shifted. The Pope's authority has ended, and England has charted its own course. The break with Rome is more than a marital solution. It is a seismic transformation, one that will reshape religion, politics, and daily life for generations. The trumpets sound bright and brassy, filling Westminster Abbey with echoes that roll against stone pillars like waves against a cliff. The air is heavy with incense, though perhaps not enough to mask the mingled smell of horses, damp cloaks, and a restless crowd pressed shoulder to shoulder. You stand among them, craning your neck for a glimpse. Today, Anne Boleyn is no longer the witty lady-in-waiting, no longer the scandalous favorite. Today she is queen. It is June 1533, and the coronation procession has stretched across London like a glittering thread. Imagine the spectacle. Barges gliding along the Thames, banners unfurling in the breeze. Pageants staged at every stop with actors playing virtues and allegories. Even the weather seems to have cooperated, sunshine breaking through the cloud cover as if summoned for the occasion. Children gape wide-eyed at the jewels, vendors hawk roasted nuts and ale. And everywhere you hear the rustle of silks as courtiers strut in their finery. For a kingdom supposedly uneasy about its new queen, the city certainly knows how to put on a show. Anne herself is radiant, and she knows it. Her gown glitters with cloth of gold, her dark hair crowned beneath a jeweled coif. You can picture her moving slowly down the aisle. Each step measured, her chin high, her expression calm but alive with triumph. She carries herself not like a woman who has won a gamble, but like one who is destined to arrive at this moment. To her supporters, she is proof of renewal England, stepping boldly into a new chapter. To her enemies, she is the living embodiment of sin, the serpent who has displaced a sainted queen. The service is long, rich with ritual. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, presides. Oil is poured, prayers are spoken, vows exchanged. When the crown is finally lowered onto Anne's head, the moment is both heavy and fragile. Heavy, because the crown itself seems to weigh more than gold laden with expectation, promise, and danger. Fragile, because even in this triumph you sense how precarious her position remains. Crowns can slip as quickly as they are placed. Outside, Londoners gossip. Some cheer with genuine enthusiasm. Others mutter that Catherine was their rightful queen and always will be. Bread and ale flow freely, masks and dances blur the edges of dissent. But beneath the festivities is unease. England has broken with Rome, and here is the woman at the center of it all, carried high on the king's arm. The people know that history has shifted beneath their feet, though they cannot yet see how deep the fault line runs. For Anne, the coronation must feel like vindication. All those years of resisting, of crafting letters, of enduring whispers and insults, it has led to this. She is no one's mistress, no one's pawn. She is crowned, anointed, blessed. Her triumph is written into the record of kings and queens. But you can also imagine the quieter thoughts running through her mind. Triumph, after all, brings its own kind of burden. To be queen is to walk a knife's edge, admired and despised in equal measure. Every move will be scrutinized, every word weighed. And then there is the matter of heirs. The crown may sit securely on her head for now, but everyone and most of all knows that her true hold on power depends on producing a son. Without him, this glorious day risks fading into bitter memory. Even as she smiles, even as trumpets sound and cheers echo across the Thames, the clock has already begun ticking. As you leave the abbey with the throng, the streets are alive with chatter. Some swear they have never seen such splendor. Others shake their heads, muttering that Catherine's daughter Mary is the rightful princess, not Anne's unborn child. The city is divided, but the crown is indisputably hers. For now, Anne stands at the height of her power, her crown gleaming in the summer light. The gamble has paid off, the impossible has happened, and she has risen higher than anyone dared imagine. But in Tudor England, heights are never safe for long. And already, all eyes turn to her swelling belly, because the future of this daring queen now rests entirely on what child she will bring into the world. The crown is still new on your head, its weight a mix of triumph and anxiety when the real test of queenship begins. You are not judged on your wit anymore, nor your gowns, nor even your ability to charm the king. Now, all eyes fix on your belly. It is 1533, and you are pregnant the news that has turned whispered doubts into thunderous expectation. You walk the palace halls knowing that every glance, every curtsy, every murmur at court is silently calculating, boy or girl, prince or disappointment. When the child is born that September, the event shakes the kingdom, though not in the way you had hoped. A girl, Elizabeth, healthy, lively, her cries sharp and insistent. A beautiful baby, wrapped in swaddling clothes finer than most people will ever touch, but still a girl. You can almost feel the collective pause across the land. As if England itself inhaled and then held its breath, waiting for a prince who did not come. Henry beams for a time because a baby is a baby, and Elizabeth is a promise of legitimacy where once there was scandal. But you notice how quickly the smiles thin, how the congratulations grow shorter. There is pride, yes, but also the undeniable edge of disappointment. For a man who has torn his kingdom away from the Pope, surely the universe owes him a son. And for you, every cradle song feels like a reminder of unfinished business. Still, Elizabeth is a child to be cherished, and you do so fiercely. You cradle her tiny body, trace the lines of her fingers, breathe in that sweet, milky scent. You whisper to her in French, in English, perhaps even in Latin. Determined that this daughter of yours will grow into something greater than anyone imagines. The court may sigh at her sex, but you see possibility, sharpness in her eyes, strength in her cries. In those moments alone, rocking her in candlelight, you believe you have given England a treasure it simply does not yet recognize. Yet beyond the nursery walls, pressure mounts like a storm. Courtiers begin to murmur again, slippery as ever, their loyalties bending toward the possibility of a more fruitful queen. Foreign ambassadors send reports back home. Anne has given birth, but not to the desired heir. Whispers slither through the corridors, each one pressing more heavily upon you. Henry, at first patient, grows restless. He assures you that sons will come, that this was merely the beginning. But his gaze drifts at times, his jaw tightens when he thinks no one is looking. You recognize that look? It is the same look he once turned upon Catherine, measuring, disappointed, searching for excuses, and you, of all people, know where that path can lead. You do your best to answer expectation with confidence. You smile at feasts, laugh at masks, keep your head high as though the entire kingdom has not silently labeled you unfinished. You walk the gardens, surrounded by attendants, presenting an image of serene fertility. Behind closed doors, though, you pray, you weep, you will your body to do what history demands of it. You feel time ticking, each month that passes, sharpening the blade hanging above you. And yet, amid the anxiety, Elizabeth thrives. She gurgles, grips your finger, watches the world with unblinking curiosity. In her you find solace, a small and undeniable proof that you are not barren, not cursed, not incapable. She is real, alive, and so very much yours. You cling to that fact, even as the court moves restlessly on, waiting for the son who will silence their doubts. So motherhood brings both joy and torment, joy in the warm weight of your daughter. Torment in the relentless question of what she is not. You love her fiercely, but the kingdom measures her like a half-kept promise. And so, you live balanced between two truths. The tenderness of a mother, and the unyielding demand of a queen. The crown has never felt heavier, and the path ahead never more treacherous. And as Elizabeth coos in her cradle, you know the pressure has only just begun. For beyond motherhood waits something even sharper, the rising tide of enemies, who are eager to see you stumble and who whisper that God himself has already passed his judgment. The thing about court life is that smiles are as sharp as daggers, and silence can wound more deeply than words. You walk the halls of Whitehall or Greenwich knowing that every embroidered gown sweeping past you might belong to a friend or an enemy. But in truth, the two often overlap. Welcome to the Tudor court, where loyalty is elastic, and shadows speak louder than the king's proclamations. Your marriage to Henry has made you queen, yes, but it has also made you a target. Catherine of Aragon still lives, tucked away yet stubbornly regal, her supporters whispering that she remains the rightful queen. Many at court agree, though they would never say so directly to your face. Instead, they offer you tight smiles and low bows. while their eyes flicker with disapproval, almost daring you to falter. Even among the ladies of your chamber, you sense who serves you out of duty rather than devotion. The clergy pose another danger. To them, you are the wedge that split England from Rome, the living embodiment of heresy wrapped in silk. Bishops and priests who once sang obedient hymns now mutter curses under their breath. Sermons in the countryside hint at the king's sin, at your corruption, and though Henry tries to silence dissent, you know you cannot gag an entire kingdom. People who never laid eyes on you still imagine you as the serpent in Eden, dragging Henry down into ruin. At court, you learn to play a subtler game. Enemies do not always announce themselves with swords or decrees. Often they prefer rumors, whispers, a raised eyebrow that sets the whole room buzzing. The Spanish ambassador writes gleefully to Emperor Charles, Catherine's nephew, reporting your every misstep. Did you laugh too loudly at a feast? Did you appear pale one morning? Was Henry seen frowning in your direction? Each detail becomes fuel for distant courts eager to see you fall. And then there are the personal enemies, those who despise not just what you symbolize, but who you are. Some of Henry's old mistresses, still hanging about the periphery of court life, regard you with icy amusement. Families once loyal to Catherine look at you as though you've stolen their inheritance. Even among the nobility, where alliances shift with the wind, you find yourself constantly on trial in the court of gossip. The truth is, your sharp tongue does not always help. You are clever, yes, and educated, but your wit sometimes cuts deeper than intended. Those who might have been neutral find themselves wounded by an offhand remark. At times, you notice Henry's wince. The subtle reminder that a queen's power lies not only in being right, but in being gracious. Yet you are an Boleyn, you cannot always soften your words, even when prudence whispers that you should. You begin to feel it, that invisible weight pressing in from every corner. Eyes follow you at banquets, hands hover too long in formal greetings, courtiers whisper behind tapestries. Each gesture is loaded, every silence suspicious, and beneath it all lies the truth. You have replaced a beloved queen. And as long as Catherine draws breath, you will never escape her shadow. Still, you walk with your head high. You wear French silks, your dark hair crowned with pearls, your eyes steady. They whisper, let them whisper. You remind yourself that queens are made not just by marriage but by presence, by refusing to bow to malice. Yet even as you carry yourself with pride, you know the shadows lengthen. With every day, Elizabeth remains an only child. With every sermon preached against you, with every friend who proves less loyal than you had hoped, the foes in the shadows are patient. They do not need to strike now, not while Henry's passion still burns bright. But they wait and they watch, knowing that favor can shift like the wind, and that one stumble may send you tumbling into their waiting hands. And so, you keep walking those gilded halls, every smile an act of defiance, every step a performance. But inside, you already sense that the stage has been set for something darker. At first, it is only a flicker barely noticeable, the kind of thing you could brush off if you wanted to. A faint sigh from Henry when you speak too sharply at dinner, a frown when you press him too insistently about reforms. You tell yourself it is nothing. After all, hasn't he moved heaven and earth for you? Hasn't he broken with Rome, appended centuries of tradition, and crowned you his queen? Surely that kind of passion doesn't fade. Surely you are safe. But slowly, in ways you cannot deny, you begin to feel it. The king's warmth cools just a little at first, but enough that you sense it like a draft under the door. He is still attentive in public, still gracious, but his eyes wander more often. His laughter, once quick at your wit, now feels forced, as though it has to be coaxed out. And when Elizabeth toddles across the floor, adorable as ever, you notice the sadness in his smile, the unspoken thought written across his face. She is not a boy. You are no fool. You know how precarious your position is. You have seen it happen to others, the king's favor, as fleeting as summer sunlight. You had once been the fresh flame, the new desire, the answer to all his restless longing. But now, to him, you are familiar. Familiar, and so, by Tudor logic, less thrilling. A man like Henry does not thrive on the ordinary. He thrives on pursuit, on conquest, on novelty. And you, in Boleyn, the woman who once denied him, are now the woman he no longer needs to chase, the courtiers. ever sensitive to shifts in weather. Notice before you dare admit it to yourself. Where once they bowed deeply, eager to bask in your favor, now they hedge their bets. A slight hesitation in their voices, an extra courtesy directed toward Jane Seymour, one of your ladies, sweet-faced, soft-spoken, everything you are not. You catch Henry looking at her with the kind of warmth you haven't seen in weeks, and your stomach clenches. You had once been her, now she plays your role, quiet and unthreatening, the balm to Henry's bruised ego. You do not go quietly, of course. It is not in your nature. You argue. You remind Henry of his promises, his sacrifices, the years he spent pursuing you. You remind him of Elizabeth's brilliance, her charm, her potential as heir. But each reminder only hardens his jaw, makes his eyes colder. The very sharpness that once drew him to you now feels to him like a blade against his pride. At night, alone in your chamber, you replay your days, wondering which remark, which gesture, pushed him further away. Was it when you corrected him in counsel? Was it when you pressed him for another chance to conceive? Or is it simply the way of things, inevitable as the turning of the seasons? You remember how Catherine once held this same fear, how her pleas fell on deaf ears, and the echo chills you? The wheel is turning again, and now you feel yourself slipping beneath it. The pressure does not ease. If anything, it grows heavier. The enemies you sensed in the shadows step closer now, emboldened by the king's wavering affection. Where once they smiled cautiously in your presence, they now smirk more openly. Rumors spread like spilled wine across the floor, whispers of your temper, of your supposed arrogance, of Henry's wandering heart. Each rumor sticks, like burrs clinging to a hem, impossible to shake off completely. And yet you stand tall, you always have. You wear your jewels, keep your chin high, speak with the confidence of a queen. But inside, you feel the ground shifting. The man who once risked a kingdom for you now seems to weigh whether you were worth the trouble. The same courtiers who once praised your boldness now mutter that it is unbecoming. Even Elizabeth, radiant and beloved by you, cannot protect you from the judgment of a court that craves a son. You had fought so hard to rise, believing love and cleverness could hold you aloft. But now you discover that in Henry's court, favor is not a fortress, it is a tide. And tides, as you are learning, always recede. And so you brace yourself, knowing what comes next will not be gentle. For as the king's warmth fades, the knives sharpen again, and the whispers gather like a storm. It begins, as so many Tudor tragedies do, with whispers. You hear them before you are told anything directly. A courtier who stops mid-bow, as if unsure whether you are still worth the effort. The air at court feels charged, like the hush before a thunderclap. You are used to rumors your whole life with Henry, has been a storm of them, but this time the tone is different. Less gossip, more strategy. The accusations drift into your hearing like smoke, impossible to grasp, yet choking all the same. They say you are unfaithful. You, who risked everything to be with the king. You, who endured scorn and upheaval for his sake. The charges are wild, almost laughably so, yet precisely because they are so dramatic, they spread with frightening speed. Adultery, treason, even witchcraft. The court devours the stories as though truth matters less than entertainment. And in Tudor England, scandal is more nourishing than bread. The names attached to the rumors make your heart lurch. Gentlemen of the court, friends, musicians, courtiers, who once smiled in your presence, suddenly marked as your supposed lovers. Some are arrested before you can even process the news. Their guilt or innocence hardly matters. What matters is the narrative, that you, the queen, who once captured a king's heart, have now betrayed him in the most humiliating way possible. And then the inevitable happens. You are summoned. The guards arrive, polite but firm, their armor gleaming, their voices rehearsed. They bow, yes, but their hands are ready. It is the strangest sensation to be both queen and prisoner in the same instant. You walk with them, every step echoing down the corridor, every eye in the palace following. Some watch with pity, others with satisfaction, few dare to intervene. In a place where favor is survival, your fall is their opportunity. The Tower of London rises ahead, its gray walls looming like a verdict before the trial has even begun. You know it well. Ironically, you once entered these gates as a queen on the eve of your coronation. The crowds cheering, the river glinting with banners. Now you return through the same gates in disgrace, accused of crimes that make your skin prickle with disbelief. The symmetry is cruel, as though the stones themselves enjoy reminding you how quickly fortune turns. Inside, the chill is immediate. The walls smell of damp stone, of old wood and older fear. Your chamber's not the filth of a dungeon. Henry still grants you some dignity, but it is a cell all the same. The guard's footsteps echo outside. Silence presses in. You are allowed attendants, but they are watchers as much as helpers. Every word you speak may find its way back to your accusers. Privacy has evaporated. Even your sighs feel monitored. You protest, of course. You declare your innocence. Demand to face your accusers. You appeal to Henry, the man who once swore eternal love, who risked a kingdom for your sake. But the message comes back blunt and chilling. The king believes the charges. Or at least he finds it convenient to. That, perhaps, is worse. Not that he has been deceived, but that he no longer cares enough to defend you. Nights in the tower are long. You replay every interaction in your mind, searching for moments twisted into evidence. Did a smile linger too long? Did a conversation behind a tapestry sound like more than it was? You imagine the men arrested with you, men who will likely suffer the same fate. You know their families, their lives. Guilt gnaws at you not for the crime you did not commit, but for the ruin your downfall drags across so many others. The silence of the tower in a place where favor is survival, your fall is their opportunity. The Tower of London rises ahead, its gray walls looming like a verdict before the trial has even begun. You know it well. Ironically, you once entered these gates as a queen on the eve of your coronation, the crowds cheering, the river glinting with banners. Now you return through the same gates in disgrace, accused of crimes that make your skin prickle with disbelief. The symmetry is cruel, as though the stones themselves enjoy reminding you how quickly fortune turns. Inside, the chill is immediate. The walls smell of damp stone, of old wood and older fear. Your chamber is not the filth of a dungeon. Henry still grants you some dignity, but it is a cell all the same. The guard's footsteps echo outside. Silence presses in. You are allowed attendants, but they are watchers as much as helpers. Every word you speak may find its way back to your accusers. Privacy has evaporated. Even your sighs feel monitored. You protest, of course. You declare your innocence, demand to face your accusers. You appeal to Henry, the man who once swore eternal love, who risked a kingdom for your sake. But the message comes back, blunt and chilling. The king believes the charges, or at least he finds it convenient to. That, perhaps, is worse. Not that he has been deceived, but that he no longer cares enough to defend you. Nights in the tower are long. You replay every interaction in your mind, searching for moments twisted into evidence. Did a smile linger too long? Did a conversation behind a tapestry sound like more than it was? You imagine the men arrested with you, men who will likely suffer the same fate. You know their families, their lives. Guilt gnaws at you not for the crime you did not commit, but for the ruin your downfall drags across so many others. The silence of the tower amplifies every fear. When the wind rattles the shutters, you imagine the clink of chains. When a guard coughs, it sounds like judgment. And beneath it all lies the realization that truth is no longer your ally. Truth is irrelevant. In Henry's England, the only truth that matters is the one that serves the king's will. So you wait.
Ow.
You hold your head high when visited. You speak calmly, even when your heart gallops with dread. You remind yourself you are queen, even if the world insists you are prisoner. But inside, you feel the walls closing in, the trap sprung. The Tower of London has a way of stripping a person down to their barest self. The stones are not just cold. They feel heavy, as if they carry the weight of every whisper, every plea, every final breath that has echoed through them. You are lodged in the Queen's apartments, a curious courtesy, considering the accusations. Not the rat-filled pits reserved for common criminals, but gilded captivity all the same. The walls are paneled, the fire burns when requested, the bed is soft, yet none of it comforts you. A chamber with curtains can still be a cage. Days here do not pass in the ordinary sense. Time stretches, strange and elastic, punctuated by footsteps in the corridor. The clatter of keys, the rustle of your lady's skirts. Sometimes it feels as though hours pass without a sound, then suddenly the door opens and a messenger appears, pulling you back into a reality you wish to escape. Each visit brings either hope or despair, and the difference is measured in the expression on someone else's face. At first, you cling to the idea that Henry will come to his senses, that he will remember the years of longing, the letters, the vows, that he will look at Elizabeth's face and see his own eyes reflected back. You picture him striding through the tower doors, banishing the accusations with a single royal word. You rehearse the conversation in your mind, how you will remind him of your loyalty, of your sacrifices. But as the days stretch on, the silence grows louder than your imaginings. Henry does not come. Instead, you are questioned. Officials arrive, courteous but stern, recording your words with practiced detachment. They present you with accusations so grotesque they almost seem like theater, liaisons with men you barely noticed at court, meetings in places you never stood, confessions torn from others under pressure. You deny it all, calmly at first, then desperately, then with a kind of exhausted incredulity. How does one prove they did not do something when the crown itself insists they did? The walls offer no answers. There are small kindnesses, though fleeting as they are. A lady brings you fresh flowers, and for a moment the chamber smells of spring instead of mildew. A servant whispers a prayer as he sets down your tray, eyes lowered in secret sympathy. Even the guards sometimes soften, their voices less clipped, their glances betraying unease. It is strange comfort, knowing that even those tasked with watching you suspect the farce unfolding. Night is the worst. By day you can busy your mind with defenses, with rehearsed speeches, with anger. But at night, when the fire dies low and shadows stretch across the walls, your thoughts betray you. You hear faint sounds from elsewhere in the tower, footsteps on stone, the distant creak of doors, maybe the muffled sobs of another prisoner. You wonder if the men accused alongside you are still alive, if they are enduring the same endless hours. Sometimes you imagine their voices, replaying old conversations, their laughter at court, now twisted into evidence. You think often of Elizabeth. Does she cry for you? Does she know her mother is locked away, her fate hanging by threads? You imagine her small hands reaching, her face searching for yours. That thought alone keeps you steady when despair threatens to break you. If you must stand trial, if you must face your enemies, you will do so with the dignity of a queen for her sake, if not for your own. And so the days pass in this strange limbo. You eat little, you sleep poorly, you wait endlessly. Time here is not marked by clocks, but by dread. The dread of footsteps stopping outside your door, of letters that never come, of hope that dims a little more with each sunrise. Yet even in the suffocating silence of the tower, you refuse to let them see you broken. You speak clearly, you lift your chin, you summon fragments of the wit that once dazzled kings and courtiers. If they expect you to crumble, they will be disappointed. But deep inside, beneath the calm words and measured glances, you know the truth. This waiting is not for rescue. It is for the inevitable. Morning comes as it always does, though this one feels different. The air in the tower is crisp, and the sunlight streams in through the narrow windows with an almost indecent brightness, as though the world itself has chosen to be cheerful on the day of your death. You wake not to hope, but to certainty. Today, there will be no reprieve, no messenger galloping in at the last moment with a royal pardon. Henry has made his decision. Your fate is fixed. You are told, with a strange courtesy, that your execution will be swift, when what some called generosity, sent for a skilled French swordsman rather than leaving you to the rough hands of an English axeman. The implication is that this should comfort you. It's a quicker death, a cleaner cut. It is a macabre kindness, and yet you cling to it because at least it spares you the image of a botched swing of suffering stretched out for spectacle. You dress carefully. It is a final act of defiance, or perhaps of dignity. A dark gown, the fabric rich but somber. You arrange your hair, pin it neatly, aware that every strand, every detail will be remembered by those who watch. You are not only a woman facing death, you are a queen, and queens must hold their composure even on the scaffold. Your attendants weep as they help you, their tears soaking into the fabric. You strangely find yourself comforting them. Perhaps that is easier than dwelling on your own terror. The walk to the scaffold is shorter than you imagined. The courtyard seems smaller now, the crowd gathered closer. Faces blur at the edges of your vision. Courtiers, guards, servants, some strangers, some who once smiled in your presence. You wonder how many have come to mourn, and how many to gawk. You keep your head high, as though their gazes cannot touch you. The sky above is wide, a pale blue, stretched like canvas, and you take one last look at it, memorizing its calm expanse. When you mount the scaffold, the wood creaks beneath your shoes, familiar yet final. The French executioner bows low before you, his presence strangely polite. You turn to the crowd, and with steady breath you speak. Your words are careful. No accusations, no bitterness. You declare your innocence, yes, but you also pray for the king, as is expected, and for England. It is theater, perhaps, but it is also truth. You will not let them write your final act as hysteria or spite. Kneeling upon the straw, you feel the roughness beneath your palms, the smell of earth and wood rising around you. You adjust your body carefully, your gown arranged with precision. You whisper a final prayer, not loud enough for others to hear, but enough to steady your heart. The executioner raises his blade, or rather, he does not. The French style is trickery. It distracts you with movement, so that the final moment comes without warning. There is a pause, an intake of breath from the crowd, and then nothing. For you, there is no sound of the blow, no sight of the sword descending. Only the stillness of release, the end of waiting, the closing of a story that has wound too tightly. The spectators will remember the sharp crack of steel, the swift severing, the silence that followed. They will tell stories of how you looked composed, unflinching, proud. They will recall how the sword flashed in the sun, how the queen fell, how even in death you seemed to defy expectation. And in that moment, your body lies still, but your story does not. For though your enemies believed they had ended you, they had only planted the seed of a legacy far larger than themselves. A daughter would grow strong and sharp, carrying your name in whispers and your fire in her reign. But here, on this scaffold, in this quiet courtyard, none of that is visible yet. There is only the sword, the silence, and the strange, fleeting dignity of a queen who has lost her head but not her courage. You are gone, and yet the story does not end. History rarely allows clean endings, especially not when thrones, crowns, and dynasties are involved. Your daughter Elizabeth is not yet 3 years old when the sword falls at the tower. She does not understand, cannot understand why her mother has vanished, why her status shifts overnight from princess to something far less secure. She is not cast into ruin. Henry ensures she is provided for, but the warmth of legitimacy. The promise of succession is stripped from her as swiftly as your head was taken from your shoulders. Elizabeth grows up in the peculiar shadow of your life. She is too young to hold memories of you, not in the way a child remembers a mother's voice or touch. But she carries you nevertheless, not in recollection, but in blood. People whisper about her origins, her dangerous inheritance, her questionable claim. She is a Tudor, yes, but she is also a Boleyn. To some, that name is a stain. To others, a symbol of daring ambition. To Elizabeth herself, it is simply something she must survive. Her early years are a lesson in instability. She moves between households, shifting from one guardian to another, her status dictated by her father's moods and marriages. One day, she is a favored daughter, charming visitors with her precocious wit. The next, she is set aside, her prospects diminished, her place uncertain. She learns quickly to adapt, to smile, to watch, to hold her tongue. She develops a kind of armor, though not the iron of a soldier. Hers is the armor of restraint, of cleverness, of silence that conceals more than it reveals. And through it all, she inherits something from you. Not just the dark eyes or the sharp cheekbones, but the mind behind them. Elizabeth has your intelligence, your wit, your taste for language and music. She has your stubborn resilience, though tempered by caution. Perhaps she also inherits your ambition, though. In her it grows colder, more measured. She watches what happened to you, and she learns the most important lesson of all. Never let passion outrun calculation. Henry dies as kings eventually must, and the kingdom lurches through a storm of succession. Edward, Mary, and finally Elizabeth herself each take the crown. Like weary runners in a relay, passing along a scepter weighted with centuries of expectation. When at last Elizabeth ascends the throne, she is not just Henry's daughter, but yours as well, and it shows. She rules with the ruthlessness of a Tudor, yes, but also with the sharp intelligence and political elegance that might just be traced back to the woman who dared to change a king, as Kingdom Anne lost her head for it. Elizabeth does not speak of you often. Perhaps it's too painful, or too dangerous, or both. But your absence shapes her as much as your presence might have. She grows into her own legend, the Virgin Queen, the icon of an age. But beneath the glittering surface, the ghost of her mother lingers. Every courtier who bows, every ambassador who flatters, every enemy who plots, none of them can erase the fact that she is your daughter. No. And so, Anne, your story does not truly end with the scaffold. It continues in Elizabeth, in the way she builds her court, in the way she defies expectations, in the way she survives in a world that devours queens. You gave her life, and in return, she gives you a legacy. It's not the one you imagined, not the path you thought you carved when you stepped into Henry's orbit, but one greater than you could have planned. History remembers you not only as the queen who lost her head, but as the mother of a queen who kept hers long enough to reshape an entire kingdom. And perhaps in the quiet spaces between statecraft and survival, Elizabeth sometimes thought of you not as the tragic figure painted by others, but as the spark she carried within herself. And that, perhaps, is your true inheritance. Not the crown, not the palace, not the fleeting title of queen consort, but the fire passed from mother to daughter, from Anne to Elizabeth, from executioner's block to golden throne. Time has a strange way of softening jagged edges. In life, you were a woman of flesh and temper, sharp words, clever laughter, and ambitions that frightened men who preferred their queens silent. In death, you become something else entirely, an image, a story, a cautionary tale, and later, almost a myth. The first version of you, the one immediately after your execution, is grim. The whisper goes that you were a seductress, a schemer, a temptress who lured a king away from his lawful wife and toward ruin. Enemies preserve you in the shape most useful to them, a warning. You are held up as proof that ambition in a woman ends badly, that those who rise too high will inevitably fall. Congratulations, you are now a medieval motivational poster. Except instead of "hang in there," it reads "don't get too clever." But memory is not fixed. With each passing decade, new brushstrokes paint over the old portrait. Some call you a Protestant martyr, a woman who cleared the way for the English Reformation by sacrificing yourself on the scaffold. Others still see you as a conniving opportunist. The truth, messier, quieter, and far more human, is somewhere between. You were a person caught in the machinery of politics, love, and power, and like all people, you were complicated. Yet complication rarely survives history's retelling. People prefer clean lines and neat categories. And so, slowly, you shift from woman to legend. Your story is retold at firesides, embroidered into plays, pressed into poems. Generations who never saw your face still know your name. The real Anne becomes harder to glimpse beneath the layers of storytelling, but perhaps you would not mind. Legends are harder to kill than people. Elizabeth's reign, long and glittering, only fuels the myth. How could the mother of such a queen be anything less than extraordinary? You become, by association, a figure of destiny. Court chroniclers retroactively cast you as chosen, as if all your life had been a deliberate prelude to birthing England's greatest monarch. Never mind the truth that you were frightened, ambitious, joyful, furious, hopeful, and very, very human. History prefers neatness to honesty. Even centuries later, you refuse to fade. Writers take you up again, reshaping you for their audiences. Some give you sympathy, some suspicion. Sometimes you are portrayed as the doomed romantic heroine, sometimes as the scheming villainess, sometimes as both within the same play. You wander across stages, novels, and eventually screens, appearing in lace collars and French hoods. Your story retold for every generation that finds something irresistible about a clever woman who changed her world and paid for it with her life. And as the centuries stretch onward, your myth takes on a peculiar endurance. Stand beside Cleopatra, Marie Antoinette, and other women whose lives ended abruptly yet never ended at all. Become a symbol not simply of downfall, but of resilience. A reminder that memory, though often distorted, has its own strange form of justice. Because in the end, no one remembers Henry for his poetry, his governance, or his tennis matches. They remember him for his wives. Of all six, your name burns brightest, wrapped in scandal, tragedy, and the echo of unfinished possibilities. That is the paradox of memory. It reduces you to fragments. Yet those fragments are enough to outlast palaces, crowns, and even kings. You may have died young, but in the centuries since, you have lived many lives in ink, in performance, in imagination. And perhaps that is myth's greatest kindness. It allows you to be more than the sum of what was done to you. It allows you to keep walking in whispers and stories, in the restless curiosity of those who still, after nearly 500 years, cannot stop wondering who Anne Boleyn truly was. And so, at the end of this long walk through shadowed halls and whispered corridors, you find yourself back where you began, safe, warm, listening in the quiet. Anne Boleyn's life, brief as a candle in a draught, has stretched across 5 centuries to reach you here. She was a daughter, a courtier, a queen, a mother, and finally, a legend, each role layered atop the other until it is almost impossible to tease apart the person from the myth. Her story reminds you how fragile power can be, how swiftly favor can vanish, and how deeply one life can ripple through history. She lost her head, but her daughter changed a nation. She was vilified, then romanticized, then endlessly retold, proof that memory reshapes people long after they are gone. In some ways, Anne Boleyn endures not because of what she did alone, but because she represents the eternal human drama of ambition, hope, downfall, and legacy. So as you close your eyes and let the night carry you, take comfort in knowing that history, for all its cruelty, is also filled with echoes of resilience. If a queen whose world collapsed so completely can still be remembered with curiosity and wonder half a millennium later, then perhaps what endures most strongly in us is not the fall, but the trace we leave behind. Rest well, for the story has been told. Good night.